Well, I'm so glad we're having this dialogue. Money shouldn't make you miserable, but it does. And that's true whether you have money or whether you don't have money. So I want to thank so many of you for taking the teaching seriously so far. Last week we told you about the financial learning experience, and a bunch of you jumped in. The good news is if you're in the room, one of the rooms today, you're watching online, it's not too late. So you can sign up. Go to connexuschurch.com/FLE. You can sign up now. And if you're watching online, it happens online. So everybody can participate. It's an all skate. And what we want to do in that 2-hour window is just help you figure out how to live with financial margin and live on mission. And the reason we're having this conversation is because you have conversations about money every day. In fact, some of you have a 10-year running argument about money. And this is how you know it's a 10-year running argument, because you say something and you can predict exactly what your partner is going to say. And then they play their role, and then you say what you always say, and then they say what they always say, and then you have a fight, and you don't talk for 2 days, right? That's how the money argument goes. It's like, well, you shouldn't spend so much on makeup. Well, you shouldn't spend so much on golf, right? And it gets into that place, and you never really go anywhere, and then the bills pile up, and you're trying to save for long-term objectives, and it's just hard. And that's what the financial learning experience can help you with. And then some of you, you know, as we saw from one couple that we heard from last weekend, you're like, no, we're doing okay, but we want to tweak it up. We think we can do better. That's what it will cover. But today, what I want to do is I want to have a conversation about you. And I want you to think about yourself, not today, but a decade in the future, 20 years in the future, 30 years, 40, maybe 50 years for some of you. Some like me will be dead in 50 years. But, you know, if you're not going to be dead, you can just extrapolate. I want you to think maybe till you get to like 80 or so, if you live that long, looking back on your life, what will you want to be true of you and the time that you actually spend in your life? And to get us started, I want you to think of somebody that you really admire. Maybe this is somebody in your family. Maybe it's somebody you know from work. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe it's somebody you knew as a kid growing up, but somebody that you look at her, you look at him, they're up there in years, and you're like, you know what, that is a life well lived. And then start breaking that down and ask yourself the questions like, well, okay, well, what is actually true of that person? And there will be a lot that's true about that person, but chances are the person you're thinking of was someone who was generous. Someone who is kind, someone who's compassionate. And when it comes to money, and that's what we're really focusing on now, there's really two kinds of legacies you can leave behind. There are two kinds of people when it comes to money. People who accumulate things for themselves and people who sacrifice for the sake of others. And if you listen to the culture, guess what the culture is about? We talked a lot about the culture last week. Culture is almost 100% about category A, accumulating things for yourself. And there are things you're going to need, right? Like some of you, you're renting. You're like, I don't know whether it's out of reach, but I'd love to own a home one day. We can talk about that because renting isn't a bad long-term strategy. It's actually not. I know it has a bad rap, but you can actually get ahead by renting, but that's maybe a conversation for the financial learning experience or for something else. But you know, you're like, well, I want the nice car and I want vacations, and then I want furniture I actually chose, not that got handed down to me. Or I want this for my kids, or I want to be able to pay for college education. And basically, the culture is a nonstop onslaught of information and messages about accumulating things for yourself. Buy this, finance that, do this. Your life isn't good because you don't have X. That's all marketing, all commercial advertisements. Basically, that's at you 24/7 in our culture. And by default, your life will become about accumulating things for yourself. But if you really think about the life you want to live and you think about the people that you truly admire, there's an alternate path, a path less traveled, and that is people who sacrifice for the sake of others. So I want to spend a little bit of time in each field. So everybody, you know, whether you have a house or not, whether you own a house or not, most of us have an idea of what a dream house would look like because you finally got into a house maybe, but it's not quite the house you imagined, right? You got to do a reno, you got to expand, hopefully a starter home, although starter homes today are like finished homes a generation ago. So, you know, what do? Do you know, I was doing some research for this week. There was a house in Bel Air, California, just outside of Los Angeles, that was the most expensive house ever constructed. So if you want to make your life about accumulating things for yourself, have this one as a goal. This house actually has a name. It's called The One in Bel Air, California. It's a mansion, obviously. You know how many square feet? 105,000 square feet. It took 15 years to build, and last year it was listed for sale. The guy who built it thought he could sell it for $500 million. And then he realized the market wouldn't bear it. So it went on sale for $295 million. Isn't that an insane amount of money? What's interesting, though, I told you about a luxury condo in Toronto in part 2. They went bankrupt. The guy who built this house went into receivership, foreclosure, and then bankruptcy, and so it didn't sell for $500 million. They're upside down on the house. But it finally sold last year. Let me show you a couple more features before I tell you who bought it and some of the details. So it has an infinity pool looking out over the hills of Hollywood and Los Angeles. And then, because one pool's never enough, you've got an inside pool as well that you can, just in case the weather drops below 20 Celsius, you just want to have that indoor pool that you can have. You can have your cold plunge and then your hot plunge and all that stuff. It is crazy. Sold for a little bit under $295 million to whom? Answer, a billionaire you've never heard of. Some CEO of I don't know who he is, sold it to him. And that's what a life of accumulation is about. It's like, well, I got the house, I got the cottage, I got the car, we're having the vacations, we're living the life, we're doing everything we dreamed of. But the question you have to ask when it comes to money is that a life well lived? I mean, a lot of you were cringing when you saw that, and appropriately so. Because there's a line, I don't know where the line is, but there's a line between enough and too much, between decent and ostentatious, between nice and outrageous. And eventually, when you cross the line, and the line's always invisible to you, you have to ask yourself, is that actually a life well lived? I think a lot of us would probably go, well, it'd be nice to have a cool house, but like, hey, really? Or is this better? Is that better? I don't even have to tell you who that is, because most of you know. And she died 25 years ago, over 25 years ago. But there's a woman who didn't have a lot. Her feet were deformed. Why? Because she wanted to make sure that the children had the best shoes, so she always wore the undersized ones. And she just went about life by life, person by person, changing the world. And I've been thinking about this over the years, and you know what I realized a number of years ago? There are no inspiring stories of accumulation, only inspiring stories of sacrifice. If you really think about the people that you admire, it's not the greedy people. It's not the people who are like, maybe you've been to someone's nice house and you're like, wow, that's a really nice house and that kind of thing, or that's a really nice car, that's a really nice life you have. But it's not really inspiring. That most of the stories you hear that really move you are stories of sacrifice, not stories of accumulation. So the question then becomes, well, what kind of life do you want to live? And what is your money going to do about it? Now, here's the problem. The problem is you can't see greed in the mirror. You know who's greedy? Other people. That's who's greedy, right? You know your sister's greedy. You maybe think, well, my dad's greedy, or you think, hey, my neighbor, he's greedy, or that guy at work is greedy, or someone you knew in high school, super greedy, or that person you read about in the paper, so greedy. But it's so hard to see greed in the mirror. Nobody woke up. None of you woke up this morning and went, you know what? You looked in the mirror and you went, I am so greedy. I'm glad I'm going to church. Nobody had that thought, right? You didn't have that thought, like, oh, I'm so greedy, I better get myself to a church. You didn't think about that, but that you're thinking, the person sitting behind you, you're like, well, they're greedy, right? That's how we think. You can't see greed in the mirror. But I want to show you a surefire way to spot greed. not in other people. Well, you can do it in other people too, but this will help you detect it in your life. You can't see greed in the mirror. You can see it in your bank account. Let that sink in. You know how you tell in your bank account? What does your bank account do? Because the math doesn't lie. If it is 100% about you, and all 100% of those purchases are about me, and you're like, well, you don't understand. We have kids, and we're really generous to our kids. Good. That's your family. I'll expand it a little bit. And you got to be careful with that because you can raise entitled children very, very quickly, especially if you have a little bit of money. But if it's 100% about you and your family, guess what? That tells you something about your life. Now, I'm beating up on you right now, so I'll stop. And I'll just tell you, I had the privilege of being raised in a Christian home. And I started wrestling with this when I was a young adult. And I realized early on, you know what the problem is? I'm greedy. I'm greedy. And I'm greedy because I think about myself all the time. I woke up, what was I thinking about? I was thinking about me. And you can say, well, that kind of makes sense because I promise none of you were thinking about me, all right? If I don't think about me, who's going to think about me? And you're like, well, you know, and reality is, most of us think about ourselves all the time. And I've lived 5 decades looking through one set of eyes, my eyes. I see the world through my filter. And I had to realize early on, I'm greedy. And as a young Christian, I realized if there was going to be a candidate, because I'm very ambitious, very driven, if there's going to be a candidate to replace God in my life as my functional God, it's probably going to be money. And early on, I kind of realized, okay, I'll never see greed in the mirror. I'll confess it. I'm greedy. I'm selfish. I'm self-focused. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're narcissistic. You know, a lot of pride is based on insecurity. It's just based on insecure. If you're an insecure person, that means you're a self-centered person. Why? Because pain is selfish. And you're always thinking about yourself. So this is just natural to the human condition. I can't see greed in the mirror, but you can see it in your bank account. And if my bank account is 100% about me, guess what? I, by default, am a greedy person. That happens to you if it's $10 in your bank or $1 million in your bank account. How much of it is going to you and your life? And what a lot of us think in our culture is rich people are greedy. It's just the rich. It's the rich. It's the rich. Rich people aren't greedy. Self-centered people are greedy. And I am self-centered. So I have to figure out in my life, what am I going to do to combat my self-centeredness? So last week we shared with you, and I'm excited to see so many of you embracing this because I think, you know, you're going to see some results now. Give yourself 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. You'll be in an entirely different place. We've helped over 1,000 people hands-on at Connexus live with margin and live on mission. If you get that, like, oh my goodness, your life's going to change. It's going to get better. You'll have financial margin. So we've kind of talked about that, but we talked about the margin last time. I want to talk about the mission this time. Because we saw the culture says, follow your heart, and Jesus said, no. Here's how your heart behaves. Your heart follows your treasure. Your heart follows your treasure. But then the question is, and this is where we'll expand today, what about your treasure? Like, where is your money going? Because your heart's going to follow your money. If you bought that really ostentatious house in Bel Air, guess where your heart is? It's not here today. It's in Bel Air because you're thinking about that house. And no matter how old you are, if you're a student, early 20s, if you're a teenager, if you just graduated college, or if you're just falling in love and you haven't had kids yet or that kind of thing, you know what? It doesn't matter how old you are. Your life is producing something. My life is producing something. And the question becomes, what is your life producing? What is my life producing? So I seriously want you to ask, if you're not a Christian, ask yourself this question. It's a great one. If you are a Christian, you should ask yourself this question. What is your life to date actually producing? Because if you don't like what it's producing, extrapolate that in 80 years, you're just going to have more of it. So by the time you're 80, okay, you're going to have to shift. And I had to shift in my life to make sure it was producing something that wasn't just more of me. So Jesus tells us this story. He's coming to the end of his life, and he's preparing his disciples and preparing you and me for what's going to happen when he's not here anymore. And he tells these stories. So let's jump into one of the stories. This is the parable of the talents. Very famous parable. So even if you haven't read the Bible, it probably sounds vaguely familiar. We'll drill into it. So Jesus is telling a story, and he says, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. So what is the kingdom of heaven? That's not just what happens after you die. Jesus ushered in a kingdom. You don't see it fully if you read the headlines and follow social media. The world is a depressing place, and it is. But there is something that if we do our jobs as Christians is breaking out in the world, and it's a kingdom of love, it's a kingdom of hope, it's a kingdom of generosity, it's a kingdom of mercy, it's a kingdom of compassion, it's a kingdom of truth, it's a kingdom of all of that. The kingdom of heaven is breaking out. Now, often in the church we don't do a very good job of that, and often as Christians we don't do a very good job of that, but it's still here. And Jesus says the more we yield to his message, the more that kingdom of heaven will be realized. And then he says, I'm going to tell you a fable, a story about a man going on a long trip. So this man, who kind of loosely stands in for Jesus/God, called together his servants and entrusted his money to them before he was gone. So remember, the money we're going to look at in this parable, not their money, not the servant's money, it's the master's money. Hint, the money in your bank account isn't your money, it's God's. Now, that's not just a message for Christians. I think that's a message for all of us, because if God created all things, he even gave us, some of you are like, I'm self-made. I don't think there's self-made people. I mean, who made you? Did you make yourself? No, you didn't. So I don't think there's self-made people. You had a lot of help along the way. Anyway, God is saying, I gave you some money. Pay attention. So he entrusted his money to them. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver, he gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities, and then he left on a trip. So bags of silver. The Greek word is talent. And you're like, wait a minute, talent refers to your gifts and ability. You know, she's so talented musically or vocally. Yeah. Because the Greek word talent didn't actually mean skill or ability. It meant money. It was a unit of currency, a very expensive unit of currency. But because this parable became so famous, in English, we just took the Greek word and started calling it gifts and abilities. So talent. Anyway, but it really means money. So how much money is actually being told? You're like 5 bags of silver. It sounds like some movie or something that I've never, what is that? So if you do the actual math, we can do the math from the first century when Jesus taught this. It actually, because of inflation, it's nice, easy math, about $5 million today, $2 million today, $1 million. 521. Now, I don't know where you come from, but that's a lot of money, okay? $1 million is a lot of money. Nobody got cheated in this story. At least I hope if somebody gave you $1 million, you wouldn't feel cheated. All right? So everybody gets money. It's like you get $1 million, and you get $1 million, and you get $1 million. So they all get millions. And then the servant who received the 5 million, and look at this, next verse. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver, 5 million, began to invest the money and earn 5 more. So it's pretty clear from the beginning that Jesus said, okay, I'm going to give you some money, and I want you to put it to work. What are you going to do with it? So the servant who got 5 bags went ahead, invested it, produced 5 more. Next part of the parable. The servant with 2 million also went to work and earned 2 million more. But the servant who received 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, that's interesting. Why would he do that? Remember we talked about this last time? That one of the reasons we don't want to trust God primarily in 2 areas, one in sexuality and the other in finance, is because we don't believe God is good. And you're going to wreck all the fun in our lives. We trust you with our money. If we trust you, And he had that viewpoint. He's like, I'm just going to hide it. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. So he kind of hinted at this. I'm going to ask you, and I really believe this is the case for me. I believe God is going to say, first of all, 2 questions. What did you do about Jesus? And the what did you do about Jesus question becomes ultimately the salvation question. I believe, whether you're a Christian or not, consider yourself a Christian or not, Jesus died for you on a cross because there had to be a way back to God. And we couldn't find the way on our own, so Jesus provided the way. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And nobody comes to God except through Jesus. And the good news is it's a universal message. It goes out to everybody, and you don't have to earn it. You have to accept it. And if you haven't done that, we'd love to give you an opportunity to do that today at Connexus, to trust your life to Jesus Christ. And once you do that, you're in. Your eternity shifts. It's not about what you do. It's about what was done for you on a hillside outside of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. Now, the second question is something along the lines of, and what did you do with what I gave you? What did you do with the relationships? What did you do with your skills and ability? What did you do with the money I entrusted you with? I think that question's going to come up too. And after a long time, people are like, people think Jesus is coming back? It's been 2,000 years. Dude, that's a long time. Jesus said, yes, it will be a long time. So that's not a terribly long time. Called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant whom he had entrusted 5 bags of silver, 5 million, came forward with 5 million more. It's like impressive. If you're the 2 million person, you're like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now, right? Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master, not surprisingly, was full of praise. He's like, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. It's like, okay, wait a minute. That's a big verse. What do you mean? You've been faithful in handling this small amount. Is there anybody here who thinks $5 million is a small amount of money? Don't put your hand up. You'll get mugged on the way out, okay? And I don't. I think that's a lot of money. And Jesus is saying, small amount, small amount, small amount. It's like, that's not a small amount. He said, compared to eternity, it's nothing. And guess what? In eternity, I'm going to give you more responsibility. You thought heaven was about slacking from your responsibilities. Now you don't want to go anymore. It's like, no, there's going to be work in heaven. We're going to be entrusted with things. And he goes, you've been responsible. Now you get this principle. Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. Let me hang on to that thought. Okay, let's celebrate together. The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward, probably a little nervously, I'm thinking, because the other guy produced 5 million in additional earnings. How much have you got? 2 million. It's like, hope I'm okay. Said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver. Here's 2 more million. Look at what the master says. The master says, well done, my good and faithful servant. Now, watch this, parallel structure. Exactly the same words in English and in Greek. If you go back to the original Greek, exactly the same words that he gave the person who came back with 5 million. Identical. Same here. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with 1 bag of silver came and said, now, guess what we know already? If this servant had come back and said, you gave me 1 million, here's another 1 million, what would have happened? The master would have said, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in this little amount. I'm going to entrust you with a whole lot more. Come and enter my joy. Same thing he said, except that didn't happen. He said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man. Remember we talked about not believing God is good? I knew you were bad. Harvesting crops you didn't plant, gathering crops you didn't cultivate. You made me do all the work. Well, wait a minute. Where did the money come from? Anyway, I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth, and look, here's your money back. Here's 1 million. But the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? It gets about 5% these days. At least I could have gotten some interest on it. And then he ordered, take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver, with 10 million. You're like, that's not fair. Well, hang on. A lot of you are parents, right? So if you have more than one child, guess what? There's one child you can give $10 to, And she comes back and she hands you back $9.90. It's like, I just spent a dime, Mom. The other one, you give $10 to. They come back with $10,000 in credit card debt. You're like, how did that happen, right? It's like, what just happened? And you're like two different people with two different worldviews and abilities. If there was a financial advisor that you had, and let's say you invested $10,000, and the next year it's like, well, the markets were bad and there's only 7 left, but I took 2,000 as a fee. Let's see how we do next year. And every year there's a depreciating balance. Although you're putting more money in every year, guess what you do? You fire the financial advisor. Why? Because they're stealing from you. You already exercised this principle, so don't get mad at God. And he goes, look, to those who use well what they've been given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But to those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. And then it gets hard. We could have a whole series on this. We're just going to glance off it, and then I'll throw it to Jeff next week. Anyway, now throw this useless servant into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Oh, God's just being mean. Well, you know what weeping and gnashing of teeth? You ever have something you've done in your life that you really regret? You wake up the next day or for the next season and you're like, if I could only get that time back, if I could only get that decision back, if I could only get that moment back, I blew it. And you're just like, you're gnashing your teeth, you're weeping over it. I think here he's talking about regret. Regret. I blew it. Now, that's not the point of the story. You know what the point of the story is? Here's the surprise. The surprise is Jesus asks you to be generous with what you have, not with what you don't have. Because here's what I think. I think most of you, even if you're not a Christian, that's fine. I'll bet you want to be more generous than you are. You want to have a more generous life, but you're like, well, these bills and the credit card and this and the kids and everything's just so expensive and groceries are so much and cars are so expensive. And like, Jesus is like, I know. I don't want you to worry about what you don't have. All I'm asking you to be faithful with is what you have. Same thing, 5 million, 2 million. God doesn't care. He's like, were you faithful with it? The 1 million, were you faithful with it? The $10, the $5, the $1, were you faithful with it? You know what the principle is? Start where you are. Start where you are. And a lot of us play this game. We keep thinking, well, you know what? I'll start giving, Carey. If we're going to sit down and have a conversation one-on-one, I'll start giving once I get this credit card paid off. I'll start being generous with my life when I make a little more money, when I get the promotion, when my partner goes back to work and we have a better income, when we get this mortgage paid down a little bit more, once our kids get out of diapers, kids just get more expensive as they get older, by the way, anyway. So it's like, it's always, well, down the road, down the road, down the road, down the road, down the road. I'm going to be more generous. And you know what? It's not true. I'm just not making that up. You want to know why it's not true? Here, check out these stats. This is a friend of mine wrote a book. It'll come out next year, so I can't share which book it is, but these are the stats he put in his book. Percentage of income given to charity. If you make less than $25,000 a year, the average person gives 7.7% to charity. But look at what happens as you go down. You make more money, you make double that, you're only giving 4.6. You get to 100,000, it's 2.6. If you're 200,000 or right into the millions, on average, 2.8%. You know what's really unfair about this? Gas costs the same whether you make $25,000 or $250,000 a year. Groceries are the same whether you're poor or whether you're loaded. This is sacrificial. This is tipping. $28,000 on $1 million? You didn't even notice it. So you're like, well, one day, when I make that, when I make 6 figures, when I finally get comfortable, well, the odds are against that. Unless you decide to live a radically different life. And if you don't believe those numbers, I encourage you to talk to an accountant. I've had this conversation with accountants over the years. They can't divulge confidential information, but they'll say, yeah, once you make 6 figures, your generosity goes down, not up. The poorest are the most generous. Convicting, isn't it? Convicting. And the point of the parable is start where you are. Start where you are. Start with what you have, not what you don't have. So I had the good fortune of being raised in a Christian home and a church. And in my early 20s, started to really wrestle with this, realizing that I would lead a very self-centered life unless I took action. So my wife, Tony, and I, we met in law school. We were students. We had no money, but one of our early decisions as a couple was that we were going to tithe 10% of our income to the church. And it was really easy because when you have nothing, 10% of nothing is nothing, right? It's super easy to do that. No, we had a little bit of money, but it felt very sacrificial. And so we gave. And we've kept that up, and then we built on that over the years. Now, I got to say something. Some of you are like, well, 10%. Here we go. I knew there was a catch to this series. This is a preacher saying, you got to tithe, and you got to tithe to the local church. Now, so if you're not a Christian, just listen and have fun at it as Christians, because I'm going to start a debate, okay, among the Christians. Because Christians will come in and say, you know what, Carey, like tithing is an Old Testament concept, and we're New Testament Christians, and there's no 10% in the New Testament. And actually, that's accurate. In the Old Testament, the part before Jesus, it was a tenth of your crops, a tenth of everything you had, you brought to the temple, you brought to the religious leaders, and away you went. So that isn't actually taught in the New Testament. You know what's taught instead? When the church started in the months after the resurrection of Jesus, the early Christians were so moved by God's radical act of self-giving that they went and they sold their property and they sold their possessions and they pooled them together and they brought them together and they gave to anybody as they had need. The poorest church in the New Testament was Macedonia. They gave sacrificially to the church in Jerusalem. It was a story of radical, life-altering generosity in the New Testament. And guess what? They were poor. You and I are some of the most affluent people who have ever walked the face of the earth. And maybe the New Testament standard is radical generosity. So what does it look like for 21st century people in an incredibly affluent global culture? We're the affluent ones. What does it look like to practice radical generosity in our lifetime? That's when Christians go, we really like the Old Testament. 10% is awesome. Okay, 10% is great. Because if you really start to wrestle with it, it gets uncomfortable very quickly. And Jesus says, hey, I know. It's weird, right? In a culture like ours, that we have so many financial problems. We're some of the richest humans who ever walked the earth. He says, that's okay. Start with what you have, not what you don't have. And Tony and I, we just started that way. And you have a little bit, so you give a little bit. And then you give more, and you give more. And this is what's getting me, is I realize there are no inspiring stories of accumulation, only inspiring stories of sacrifice. So I promised you I'd tell you about a really stupid financial decision I made. This one happened in the year 2000. It was a weird year. We all thought our computers were going to die, and they didn't. Maybe I'll blame it on that. No, actually, I'm a car guy, and always been a car guy since I was a kid, and we had driven used cars to that point. My wife, Tony, who's the more financially responsible of the two of us, is like, our car was dead, we need to get a new car. Our kids were getting older, and we need to get a new car, a different car, but she wanted to buy used, I wanted to buy new. And I have impeccable taste, and I got my eye on this new car that I just fell in love with. And I went against Tony, and we were not united. Big mistake as a couple, not united on this. I went out and bought a brand new car. And I want to show you this car. Sign of my impeccable taste. Check it out. It's a 2000 Ford Taurus station wagon, gold. Gold, that's exactly the car. Thank you. I'll do your interior design for free if you want that. I don't know what I saw in that car, but like 25 years ago, I thought that was the cat's meow, and I wanted it. And I went in, $35,000 new, and the car payment, because it was 0% financing, $583 a month. And I went around going, see, we can afford that. Well, because God's always on your wife's side, on the way home from the dealership, the car starts to shake on the highway. I'm like, Oh my goodness. But it's got a warranty and everything. It's in the shop a month and a half and they can't fix it. And I'm like, it was one thing after another with that car. It was built by a drunk person on a Friday afternoon. Like, I don't know. I'm not against Ford, but for me, that was found on road dead. That's what that stood for. It was an awful car. And 4 years later, it barely ran. I traded it in. You know what I got for that $35,000 car? $6,000. You might as well just take a whole pile of money, tens of thousands of dollars, put it in your backyard, in your fire pit, get some gas, light a match, and burn it up. Because that's what I did with the money that God entrusted me with. And it was 20 years until we bought a new car again. So anyway, God's always on. The Holy Spirit sounds like your wife, I promise you. You know where that car ended up? Here. Is that an inspiring life? Is it? And you want that house, you want the lake house, you want the cottage, you want the vacations. And I'm not saying you shouldn't get that. But it's going to be designed perfectly. It's going to be ready for a magazine. And they're going to come in and they're going to take a picture, or at least you'll be able to post it to your TikTok or to your social media. And you're going to be able to do that. And you know where all that stuff inside those homes ends up? Because your kids don't want it. It ends up here. And at the end of your life, that's what you've got to show for it. And I find this really convicting. In that beautiful lake house, you know what happens to it? It becomes a tear down for your grandchildren. So the question is, what will your legacy be? What will your legacy be? I'm not saying you can't have stuff. But if that's it, if it's 100% that, is that the life you want to live? So this week, here's what I want you to do. Start putting what you have, not what you don't have, to work. Start putting it to work. I shared with you last week that a couple of years ago, we started sponsoring some compassion kids. And that was a decision we made over and above what we give to the church. And, here's Freddie and here's Merle. And we love these kids. And I can't wait to see them next year. That's like, okay, that's a better life than just yet another thing. And another thing that really moves me? You do. Like, I have the privilege of being one of the people who helped start this church. And we were doing ministry for years before that. And if you could show us a picture of what this would become 25 years ago, we never would have believed it. And there have been times along the way where Tony and I, we have 2 boys, they're grown now, where we were in the middle of big ministry projects and we were nervous and we thought we have to put our money where our mouth is. And we kind of drained what we had earmarked as our kids' college savings fund into ministry. It was a big season for the church. And we took all the money that we could think of, all the money that we could scrounge, some savings and then some pledges, and we didn't know how we were going to make it, and we committed it to ministry. And you know what? God provided. Our kids went on, one's a software engineer, one's an accountant, and I'm thinking, couldn't you have chosen less expensive educations? But God provided. God provided. It's amazing when you give how He gives back and what He does. And it's like, do we miss the money? No, we don't miss the money. And when I look back on my life, I want to do more and more and more and more of that. Because I'm amazed at the stories God is writing. One of the great joys of doing this series is I don't know 75% of you. That's awesome. That means our church is alive, and half of you don't have a church background. That's exactly what a great investment in this life, in you. And I'm not alone. There are hundreds of people who have made those investments over the years for decades in you. And all I know is when I give, it's the best antidote to greed I have in my life. Because you can't see greed in the mirror, but you can see it in your bank account. And you can't see generosity in the mirror. Am I a generous person? I don't know. But you can see it in your bank account. So this week, put what you have to work. And don't worry about what you don't have. If you're where I was in the middle of school and you got almost nothing, just put that money to work. Because Jesus expects you to be faithful with what you have, not with what you don't have. So here's the question. What do you have? What do you have? Because if you're waiting to be generous one day, when you make $100,000, when you make $1 million, when you have your own, you saw the stats. It's not going to happen. It starts now. What do you have? And if you don't want to give to our church, that's great. Just live a generous life somewhere else. What do you have? What do you have? Because that's what God works with. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, this is super challenging, but so rewarding. Give us the courage, even today, to start with what we have. God, there are no inspiring stories of accumulation. So don't make our lives about accumulation. Teach us to be giving. The things we want to do, Lord, show us where we can start today. I pray for those who are right on the bubble right now, financially. I pray for those who have a lot. And I pray for our church, God, that we would be known as some of the most generous people. Not even known, Lord, even in secret. But we make an impact that when we look back on our lives, you might say to us one day, well done, good and faithful servant. In Jesus' name.